Welcome, everybody. In case you don't know me, my name is Jonathan Taylor. I'm a member of the synagogue, a member of the executive of the Zionist Federation, and a passionate Zionist. Welcome, everybody. Distinguished guests, our rabbis, Clancy, Chapper, and Taylor, the mayor of Elstree and Borehamwood, Farida Turner, and all of you who've made the effort to attend in person. In fact, there are many people who registered for this event and haven't turned up. Presumably, they are rather nervous about being here. And as well as the others who have tuned in via our video link. On behalf of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom and Ireland, Borehamwood and Elstree Synagogue, the World Zionist Organisation, of whom the head of the UK delegation is here this evening, good evening, and the Zionist Council, Central Council of Manchester, may I say how honoured and delighted we are to welcome Tzipi Hotovely.
Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, the Ambassador of the State of Israel to the Court of St. James. Is that correct? The interesting story is that you were born and raised in Rehovot at the time where I lived for 5 years, and my children were also growing up at the same time.
Amazing.
And there's somebody in this audience who actually saw you in the pram when they lived in Rehovot. So that gets the best reaction.
Wonderful.
Welcome also to Natasha Hausdorff, who will be interviewing and moderating this evening, and shortly will introduce the ambassador properly. Natasha is a barrister and the legal director of the UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust, having completed an LLM specializing in public international law and the law of armed conflict. A word of thanks is due to the synagogue and its events team, Abigail Goodman, Debbie Levine, and of course to the ZF staff, Dalia Hadjioff, Melissa Stock, and the executive director, Steve Winston, without whom this event would certainly not have been possible. The ZF Connect magazine is placed at the entrance. We'd like you to take a copy on your way out, in which you can see the extensive and exhaustive activities of the Zionist Federation in Israel advocacy, financed almost totally from private donations. Just one point, please. We ask you during this event not to Twitter or use Instagram or any of the social media. It's very, very important. We've been advised by security, please. Now I hand you over to Rabbi Alex Chapper, our senior rabbi, for his words of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Rabbi Clancy, Rabbi Taylor, Mayor of Elstree and Borehamwood, your worship councillor, Farida Turner. On behalf of everyone here at Borehamwood and Elstree Synagogue, I'm delighted and honoured to welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel to the Court of St. James, Mrs. Tzipi Hotovely. The Ambassador will be in conversation, as you've heard, with Natasha Hausdorff, Director of UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust. It's lovely to see you again here at the Eventful Borehamwood. Thanks to our partners for this evening, to the ZF, the WZO, the ZCC. Special thanks once again to Johnny Taylor for all his efforts in arranging this event for us this evening. Thanks also to the CST and security for keeping us safe this evening. Friends, our community is very proud of its connection to the State of Israel. And ironically, this week we read how God promises Abraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, the land of Israel. And God tells him, raise your eyes up, lift them up, and look from where you are. To the north, to the south, to the east and the west. Because I will give you all of the land that you can see for you and for your offspring forever. Now, the question is, Abraham could have just been told to look and see. So why is he asked to raise up his eyes and to look? The Or HaChaim explains that the Torah is in fact alerting us to the miracle that God expanded Abraham's vision at that point so that he could see the entire land of Israel from the place that he stood. And in fact, it was to be an eternal miracle and promise to the Jewish people. And we have all seen this expansive vision that has enabled the miraculous development of the modern state of Israel from its birth. And in the past 18 months, we have in fact witnessed a unique phenomenon. Whereas Israel has been hailed as a world leader in its response to the COVID challenges. So we say this evening, in the presence of the ambassador, we should Israel raise up her eyes. When it does, we will see her wonderful achievements. We look forward to hearing from you, Ambassador, about one eventful year on, and we pray, Sim Shalom Ba'aretz. May God bless the state of Israel with peace. Amen. Amen.
I hope this is working. If not, I'll try and project. If everyone at the back can hear, excellent. I'm afraid I don't think it is working. Absolutely right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our audience here in person. Extremely exciting to be in a room again after having spent so long looking at each other over screens. So to our audience in person, welcome. And to those watching the live stream at home, it's wonderful that we are able to have you here with us as well. It is my distinct privilege to introduce formally Her Excellency Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely. She was born in Israel, in Rehovot, as we have heard. Tzipi Hotovely is the 18th Israeli ambassador to the Court of St. James and the first woman to be appointed to the position. Ambassador Hotovely has held numerous positions in the Israeli government. She has served as Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, and while she was a member of Knesset, she chaired the Women and Gender Equality Committee. She's also a qualified lawyer with law degrees from Bar-Ilan University, and she is a member of the Israeli Bar Association, so perfectly placed, I think, to field some legal questions later on in the evening. Ambassador Hotovely, you have been in London now with your husband, or Alon, who is also a lawyer, and your 3 daughters for a year. And certainly it has been a highly unusual year. You arrived in the middle of the pandemic. How have you and your family found the transition to the United Kingdom in those particular circumstances? And how is your time in London so far?
Well, first of all, thank you, Natasha, for hosting me tonight. I would like also to thank the ZF and all the wonderful people that actually bothered to go outside of the house. And thanks to that, I'm not seeing the small cubes anymore of the Zoom. So it's really nice to see people not behind small cubes. So it's so refreshing and it's so exciting for me. So you're actually my first real event with the community. And I'm very, very excited. And I think you deserve that because you happen to be the biggest community here in the UK, isn't it, Rabbi? Wonderful. So I'm very happy and delighted to be here with you. I want to thank again Dalia. I want to thank Nomri, who just arrived here and is an excellent leader coming from a very, very important, significant service in Israel's IDF, and now he wants to bring his wonderful abilities to the young generation here in the UK. And I would like to thank you. I shouldn't call you Joni, you're really Jonathan, right? Jonathan, okay. So Jonathan and all the wonderful people and the team that made this evening happen. I came during the pandemic, but I want to start actually with good news. Everyone has been asking me just one question since I arrived, and it's not how's London, it's not how's Bibi, it's not anything of that. People were asking me only one question. When is the country going to open up and we can finally come and visit? And today, I finally have an announcement to make because the Israeli government received finally a governmental decision to open up the country from the 1st of November to everyone who's been double vaccinated. Here. I know how much the Jewish community is connected to Israel, how much you enjoy traveling to Israel, how much you missed Israel in the last 2 years. And I'm so happy, really, that I finally don't need to say things like how much I'm sorry, but I can actually say, welcome to Israel from the 1st of November. Please come and use the fact that this country was doing such a great job in vaccinating everyone, and you'll be able to travel. So I wanted to start with that because this was really the only thing that people cared about in the last year. So I really appreciate I finally have some good news.
My mother included. She's been waiting for me.
Your mother included. Wonderful.
Well, of course, it's the pandemic itself that has probably been the best news about Israel, at least as far as the UK is concerned. There's been a lot of attention on Israel's vaccination rollout and close scientific cooperation between the UK and Israel. And of course, we had Michael Gove's visit to Israel, which you accompanied him on. What's your
Michael accompanied the Press Secretary
more recently, but so taking into account Michael Gove's visit and
continue. Yeah. We are a democratic country.
We are.
We really appreciate freedom of speech. Enjoy yourself.
Considering the incredible things that Israel did in leading the way, I might borrow that if that's all right.
Okay, sure.
Just because I've been speaking all day and I might be losing my voice a little bit. Yeah. So considering the incredible way that Israel led the vaccination effort and vaccination rollout, what's your experience been of presenting that to the British media, and also your experience of that scientific cooperation between the UK and Israel?
Shame. Go home. Go home. Don't offend us. Go home. Go to Ramallah.
Don't worry. We are a democracy. We really appreciate freedom of speech. It's all good.
You spit in our faces. Go home.
I think by paying attention, you're giving them what they want. So I think it's better to speak about Israel and the UK scientific cooperation.
And they may learn something.
I think that the pandemic was a moment for everyone to realize that we live in a global world that faces serious global matters. And in order to overcome things like the COVID, we had to cooperate. No country could have done it by itself. So thanks to the great scientists here, scientists that did the AstraZeneca vaccine in Oxford, the scientists of Pfizer, thanks to the fact Israel has a digital health system, thanks to the fact we could have made like round tables with the British scientists. We all could share practices and to help each other in order to achieve what at the moment it looked like we are really recovering from a long time of pandemic. And I think for me, it was very refreshing to arrive here and to see basically good news. And I was opening the newspapers. I was very, very happy to see Israel was leading the vaccination rollout. But the truth is, we all experienced very, very difficult and challenging times. And Israel went through very, very difficult 2 lockdowns. And when I arrived here, I also had to experience lockdown. And I think the thing we miss more than anything, and I would like to quote the Queen for that. One of the great privileges of being the ambassador to the Court of St. James is to present your credentials to the Queen. And my husband, who's a very unique person of a character, he said to the Queen, "Your Majesty, I don't really need to follow the protocol, so I actually can ask you questions." I think she was quite shocked, but he said, "May I please ask you from your experience, from your life experience, what's the best advice you can share with us?" And she was thinking for a second, she was hesitating, she said, "It's a serious question." And she said, "So my best advice for you, from my life experience, is that you really need to invest in relationship, because this is the only thing that matters in life." And how much we can agree with the Queen, that really the only thing we were missing throughout the pandemic was the fact we didn't have our relationships next to us. We couldn't meet our relatives in Israel, people that live here. People in Israel were feeling bad, couldn't meeting their grandparents. The children, my children for a long while couldn't visit their grandparents. Those kind of things make you think about what's really significant and important in life. And I think today, we're really, really happy that thanks to modern science, thanks to the vaccination rollout, thanks to the fact we're all boostering everyone to prevent from us to go through a bad winter, I really believe that this bad time is behind us and we can finally invest more in relationships, especially for me as an ambassador. It's really important to start building the networks and the relationships. So I'm really, really happy that I have 2 years to fix the first very, very difficult year.
Well, relationships are key, also key to peace. No doubt something that our recent visitors and everyone else in this room do actually share in common, the desire for peace. And just over a year ago, we all experienced the signing of the Abraham Accord, something so many people said could not be done. Normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, followed by Sudan, Morocco, Oman. And soon after you arrived in London, you held meetings with the Abraham Accords ambassadors. What would your main takeaways be from the experience of these successful normalization agreements?
That was a great moment for the Middle East, and that was a great moment in history for Israel, our relationships. And my first meetings, my first face-to-face meetings were with my new colleagues from the Abraham Accords. And I also hold meetings with the Egyptian ambassador and the Jordanian ambassador by delivering the message: we don't replace new friends with our old friends, we just extend a circle of peace. And it was wonderful. I got the best and most warm hospitality. And I'm really, really excited about this peace agreement because the experience we had in the past, that it takes a long while to political process become something that people really share. And this time it was a real people-to-people kind of peace. And we've seen it with the mass of tourists from Israel went to Dubai and started really to celebrating peace. And we could have seen more businesses going and people traveling and more agreements being signed and cooperations about health, about agriculture, about science cooperation, everything in such a small time. We can see how the peace agreement was something that got such a big, massive ingredients in it. And I feel like this is like really new chapter. And it shows something about possibilities and where to put and where to invest. And I think today more than ever, it's clear for many countries in our world that Israel is an asset. Israel is a country that it pays well. When I'm saying pays well, I mean in terms of cooperation for the future, for a better future to cooperate with. And we heard here I was just spending 2 weeks ago great time in the Conservative Party conference, and we heard the Foreign Secretary speaks about how important it is to cooperate with Israel because the future really belongs to those who innovate, and Israel is in the front line of innovation countries, and I'm so proud of it. This is why it's such a unique honor to come to serve here at a very special time where the Middle East is changing and we can actually create more opportunities to extend circle of peace.
Nelly also identified a key factor behind those normalization agreements as being Iran. And certainly there may have been one positive side effect of increasing Iranian hegemony in the region in the Abraham Accords. But the problem of Iran is ever present and worsening. What do you think Israel should be doing to convince the rest of the world that this is too serious to ignore? And specifically, can the UK be doing anything to counter Iran's promotion of terror and its destabilizing influence in the region?
I don't think anyone is ignoring it. I think everyone understands that it's a serious, serious problem. And this is part of maybe, I would say 90% of my security work is about Iran. And we invest all our energy and all our professionals in order to create delegations and very open dialogue between Jerusalem and Washington, Jerusalem and London, London, Washington. So all this triangle works very well. And we think that everyone understands what's the goal. The goal is to prevent from Iran to get nuclear abilities. And we will do whatever it takes in order to do that. I'm quoting my prime minister. And President Biden was backing up the fact that if diplomacy doesn't work, we need to have more options.
That cooperation, that dialogue, of course, extends to security cooperation, which is key between Israel and the UK, and that's remained strong. And it was a couple of years ago that reports emerged of Israel tipping off the UK to a Hezbollah bomb plot in London in 2015. I'm sure there are many similar instances which we simply don't hear about, but do you sense that this cooperation is appreciated and valued by your counterparts here? Absolutely, yes. Looking specifically to your experiences, and I think a key part of that we can't ignore is the circumstances of May this year. We had the troubling scenario of another conflict with Gaza, and in those times, the ambassador here is on the front lines of combating a substantial amount of misinformation and misreporting in the British press in particular. So I want to ask, what was your experience of the media's coverage in the UK in particular over those few weeks?
I came here because I know how much British media is significant. I think that part of being an ambassador here is to speak to the world, because the British media doesn't speak just for the UK, it speaks to the world, at least to the English speakers, and there are many of them. And I think that the experience is always challenging, because I think for many years, people here were used to different structure of putting Israel in certain boxes of how you look on the conflict. And when Israel did the disengagement in 2005, there were no settlements anymore. So Israel couldn't be accused about settlements issues. And there should be like a new formula. How do we address the fact there is still violence in the Middle East? And I think part of my work was to show that we are a democratic country, defends its people from aggressive jihadi terror attacks. It has nothing to do to, peace process or anything, because the way Hamas looks at Israel is that basically the best solution is that Israel won't exist. And this is the people we're dealing with. And since Western civilization has experienced many times dealing with radicals, we need to give a clear message about dealing with radicals. This is not about compromises. This is not about, what Israel could have done better, because we always try to improve ourselves. We always want to save the life of people. We always care about human rights. We always care about rule of law, and we keep the rules of the international law. But it is important to understand we're a democracy under attack, and you need to stand there in the front lines and to address horrible questions like why you're killing kids, which is of course outrageous, because Israel is protecting kids while Hamas is using its own kids, and everyone knows in this room what's the reality on the ground, but this is my job to tell it to the world. And we had to do that for a long while. And I believe that this battle is really important.
And soon after the conflict, of course, you did accompany Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab at the time.
Both Dominic Raab and Liz Truss.
Liz Truss more recently, I think, on the trade delegation. The trip with then Foreign Secretary Raab in the aftermath of that conflict, was there a general sense, did you feel, of understanding, at least at Foreign Secretary level, of what Israel was up against?
I think we got the best support from the British government. Basically, diplomacy is all about giving your partners, your world partners, the ability to work in the way that serves the interests of the country. And the Israeli interest was to work to a certain point till we felt like the infrastructure of Hamas was destroyed. And I think we got the full backup of the British government.
I want to pick up on something you said about the removal of settlements from Gaza in the context of helping people understand that particular conflict. And of course, it's been many years now since there have been any peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority that controls the West Bank. Clearly, there's enthusiasm in the UK to get talks back on track. But when people in the international community and here talk about making concessions in the West Bank, it seems to me that they often seem to ignore the lessons that were
learned or should have been learned in the Gaza Strip, and with the withdrawal from Gaza, how do you think it's best to convey Israel's concerns and counter perhaps the casual way in which many seem to expect Israel to take additional risk?
I don't think at the moment there is Palestinian leadership that is willing to sit and negotiate. So I think everyone knows Israel wants peace. Everyone knows that every single prime minister was giving all his gravity, including the international community leaders. But you can't impose peace. It's a process that needs to grow from the people and from the leaders. And Israeli leadership was always keen to achieve peace. And I think that we need to realize the fact that at the moment, the Palestinian street is being controlled by Hamas supporters. The reason there is no election in the Palestinian Authority for over 10 years, which doesn't reflect any democratic values, is because everyone knows that Hamas will take over. And Hamas denies the right of Israel to exist. This is a reality on the ground, so we need to face it.
Those are certainly the realities on the ground. When we zoom out and look at the international community's take on Israel and perhaps also on international law, I know that there are quite a few people in the room that are spending a long time focusing on that particular phenomenon, the misrepresentation of international law as part of this conflict. There was a quite famous op-ed in the New York Times in 2011 by Mahmoud Abbas, where he seemed to set out his agenda on lawfare, the abuse of law, and particularly international law, for political means. But this was an op-ed where he said Palestine's admission to the United Nations would pave the way for the internationalization of the conflict as a legal matter, not a political one. It would also pave the way for us, he said, to pursue claims against Israel, the United Nations, human rights treaty bodies, and the International Court of Justice. So that was Abbas's declaration of lawfare. We can see that it's been pretty incredibly successful if we consider that everything happening at the International Criminal Court is underpinned by that agenda. And also, I think, increasingly by civil society organisations, NGOs, that are falling into line with that particular agenda. My question is, what, if anything, can we and civil society organisations supportive of Israel be doing to combat that particular battle, that lawfare arena, if anything?
I think we need to give respect to people who didn't go to law school, a few of them. So I want everyone to be involved in campaigning for Israel. I know where you're coming from, Natasha. You're a brilliant lawyer, and we really appreciate that people like yourself can do a great job when it comes to the legal aspects of it. But let's not get confused. The legal aspect of it is just a mask. What we really need to do, and I think this is the duty of each of one who sits in this room, is speak about values. Every time I speak to my counterparts all around the world, I used to be a deputy foreign minister, I used to travel a lot. The biggest issue, when you have like-minded countries, what are the values we want to promote? Are the values of human rights, democracy, or to develop a society that basically doesn't respect any human rights, doesn't care? You know, the thing that shocked me more than anything after Hamas was taking over the Gaza Strip, there were very, very famous pictures of Hamas people throwing from the towers of Gaza the people of the PLO to their death, basically throwing their brothers to their death in the most brutal way, as if human life didn't mean anything. And I think this is where we're bringing our case. We really care about human life, and this is what we do as a country. And we're dealing with people that don't mind killing brutally their own brothers. And this is a matter of values, and we need to discuss that and put that in the front. As much as I respect my biography, as someone who spent too many years in law school, I went all the way to PhD in Tel Aviv University. almost before I finished. It was when I walked into politics and I decided to be part of Israeli leadership. But we mustn't do it technicalities, it's about values. And don't let them use all those terminologies because they're really terrorists and we need to address that. And we need to take off the masks and speak about terrorism, jihadi ideology. This country is fighting jihadi ideology for years. We are part of the same group of countries that are fighting jihadi ideology.
It's just Israel's had a few more years' experience of that, I suppose, which is invaluable as far as the UK is concerned.
Are we going to get some questions from the audience?
We are. I've been given a time to in.
Okay.
Well, I would. Should we take one more
Sure.
of the areas that I've been asked to cover, and then
We're going to use everyone. We're going to speak about legal issues. Believe me, I switched from legal issues to politics because it's much more interesting.
If everyone can be thinking of their question, we'll take one or two more and then move to the floor. I want to ask in particular your background. Your parents were being from Georgia, one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, said to date back to the Babylonian conquest, absolutely. So I want to ask how you think your experience, or their experience in fact, influenced your work in politics and now diplomacy.
Very much. We're very much influenced from our families. I think I owe everything I have in life to my devoted parents. And I think that one of the values that was really crucial is the fact that Jewish statehood is nothing you can take for granted. You need to work hard to keep it. And I got this message from my grandfather that left a brand new house and a very, very good job. And everyone respected him so much that they asked him, his name was Michael, why are you leaving? And he said, because I'm a Jew and Israel is my home. It was as simple as that. And my family's generation were part of the 18 families that applied to the UN in order to open the Iron Gate of the Soviets, in order to get the right to come to Israel. I think this is something that comes in my DNA, the fact that we need to work hard to keep the Jewish state be successful, and the fact that every Jew should feel connected to the Jewish state.
It seems to perhaps also be key to your experience as Deputy Foreign Minister and Minister of Diaspora Affairs. Has that also, those experiences informed your work now in London? So there is a special relationship between Israel and the world Jewish community. So I wonder, how would you compare navigating that relationship as Minister of Diaspora Affairs and now as Ambassador?
I think the Jewish world is the most fascinating thing in the world. I think that we're really privileged to live in a time where Jews can meet each other so easily. I wish we all could speak the same language, which is a shame we can't. But I think it's exciting, the fact that we can get together around the same table, we can argue, we can have a dialogue. But I am very much concerned from the fact that, and this is actually my mission, I'm very much concerned that sometimes around the table of Israeli supporters, there are people that belong to the same generation. And then I'm asking, where is the young generation? Where are the people that are the age of the youth movements? Where are the youth movements? I think that some of the young people here, because of different trends because we live in different times, they don't have the inspiration that the youth movements used to give to many people here when they grew up. Many people come to me and they're so excited and saying, I'm a Bnei Akiva graduate. I went with one of the former ambassadors, Daniel Taub, we grew up in the same place. And the Zionist spirit that this community has is something that we need to preserve. And in order to preserve that, we need to do a major education work with the young generation. I don't think it just comes naturally, because it's really swimming against the stream to, have this strong identity about Israel when you live in the UK, because eventually you need to travel more and be informed more. So this is one of my missions, and I really hope that we can do more about that.
The first question from the floor has actually been given to me in advance, and it's from Michael Reek, who's on the national board of the Zionist Federation. And he asked if he was in the room. I'm not sure that he is. If he's in the room, then he can ask his question himself. Would you like to?
Natasha, you need to understand. I mean, this is real people. They can ask me questions. I'm so excited.
I just follow instructions on that.
No, of course. I'm just really excited from the fact that in front of real people after this year.
I can remember what the question is.
You can ask a different one.
May there was fighting inside Israel between Arabs and Jews, and that created a terrible situation. What is the situation now in those areas where the fighting took place, and what is the latest of the current government doing about preventing that happening in the future?
That's an excellent question, because I think one of the things during the last military operation that made us all be really, really concerned was the fact that the delicate, very, very strong relationship between Israel's and Arab Israelis was broken. And we could have felt that in the cities of Lod and Akko. And people were so terrified from the idea that we'll go into a civil war, basically. And I think that for many years, Israel's different governments knew that part of our duty is to make sure that equality and democracy is something that will be reflected also when it comes to budgets. Here we speak a lot about leveling up, so it was part of our mission to level up all the different communities that Israel's diverse society is built from. And this government is very unique because, as you know, it's very diverse and it has our big party in it. So we definitely want the representatives of those communities, as some of them really are doing, will come to live peacefully together, because the only future we have, only we live peacefully together. And I think that the Israeli government is doing really major efforts to make sure that all the tension that was exposed during the military operation won't be something that will be ignored. This is something that the government is putting lots of both budget and also when it comes to dealing with weapons in the armed society. So there are many aspects of it. And I think this is something that we all feel that should be very, very high on our agenda, this delicate coexistence.
Questions. And since we don't have your Zoom names, if you could just introduce yourself briefly when you ask. There's a gentleman just at the front here.
Thank you, Mum. Daniel J. Levy. Question about the Abraham Accords. Could you maybe comment on the current state of Israeli-Sudanese relationships and where the ideal for the Israeli government for relationships? Sudan, so Jerusalem, Khartoum.
The truth is that I didn't meet the Sudani ambassador, and I can't tell you too much about what's going on there, because the official Abraham Accords were Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. Also with Morocco, we don't have official ambassador yet, so the process was really going fast about the two countries that signed the official Abraham Accords.
Right at the back, I saw a hand that's disappeared, but there's a gentleman just there by the left.
Good evening. Given the wonderful relations between Israel and America with the Trump administration, how difficult is it to deal with the Biden administration, bearing in mind he was the deputy vice president of the Obama administration? Is that a problem?
I think we need to say the great Israel-America alliance that has nothing to do to who sits in the White House. It is important because I'm sure you're thinking, no, she's being a diplomat. But no, it's much bigger than that, because you need to understand that one of our biggest military supports that America signed was during the Obama administration. So it's really not about the identity of the president. It's really the alliance between Israel and America. And I think that You know, even when you have many times you agree on many things, all countries have different interests. Even if you have the strongest alliance, you still need to keep your own interest when you speak with the best ally that you have. So at the moment, the Biden administration definitely understands the big concern we all have and we all share value on. And I think this is where we want to put all the gravity of what we can do together when it comes specifically to security. And we are doing a lot with Washington about this issue. And we're doing here many things. And actually, some people, because London is in a very important place in the world where everyone that travels to Washington can pass through London, I've been receiving many security delegations that are dealing with this, coming back and forth, Washington, London, Jerusalem.
Thank you.
So maybe just in front here.
Firstly, the Abraham Accord, how do they relate to you, being Muslims, as a female woman? That's number one. And the second question, you say that the world, we are all fighting jihad extremists. But at the end of the day, they don't see Israel's case in the same way as they see their problems with the extreme Muslims.
Two questions. There are two different questions. So can you explain me the first question? I don't think I got it.
So they're quite traditional societies. The ambassadors that you've been meeting from the countries of the Abraham Accords, how has the interaction been? You being a female ambassador, or it's all okay?
Very easy because they're very modern and quite, I don't know how to say. It's not like it's a very modern society. I'm sure whoever visited the Gulf countries can understand. I never experienced any problem with that.
There's a lady in the
Another question about the jihadis.
I didn't really understand.
Oh, that was a bit that you up. So, is it? Forgive me if I'm understanding the question right.
Natasha can't understand. Definitely, I can.
Are you suggesting that the cooperation is not necessarily based on shared interests?
No, I think she more meant that even though we're fighting the same cause, it doesn't seem like we're fighting the same cause.
Is that right?
But I don't know how to address it because this is a statement. This is not a question. So, like,
no, because you were saying it's the same, the Western world, but it isn't exactly because the Western world doesn't see Israel issue with the Palestinians, especially the same way.
I think when it comes to terror organizations, recognized, let's say Hamas. Hamas is a recognized terror organization, recognized by the US, by the European Union, by the UK government. So everyone knows Hamas is a terror organization. And no one can say when Israel is protecting itself from Hamas that this is something that's illegitimate. And this is why we get such a big support when we are having those military operations. Let's not get confused between media criticism and governmental support. What works in diplomacy, as much as it's going to sound surprising, is not the BBC commentators, it's actually the governments. And this is why I'm not saying BBC is not important, of course. I mentioned before, this is a very important arena for public diplomacy, but it is important to understand that people do understand that we are fighting the same bad people that are driven from the same ideology, that don't want peace or compromise, they want to kill us. So.
There is, of course, currently a campaign by a number of communal organisations to seek the full proscription of Hamas in the UK.
Yes, this is part of our work, but it was just because of Brexit, because basically till not long time ago, the UK was part of full proscription.
The lady just who had stood up, and then the gentleman over here with the moustache. Next, thank you.
What's your name?
Carol.
Carol, nice to meet you.
From London. What steps did you take to become ambassador?
What steps did I take? 11 years in Israeli politics. It's way more than steps, believe me. 4 years in Israel's foreign ministry. It's a long experience in diplomacy.
And the gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Richard. I've been reading a lot in the paper, little articles about America trying to force Israel to open a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem, which will challenge the sovereignty of Jerusalem and also do away with Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Israel. What is the government doing about that? Because it's a very serious, and I think the Trump administration is not particularly friendly to Israel.
I must say that this question is in a concern of many, many Jewish communities around the world. I got that from also American friends. This is a serious issue. The Israeli government doesn't accept the idea of opening a consulate in Jerusalem. There is a diplomatic dialogue around it, but the official governmental approach is we're not allowing Jerusalem to have the consulate. Again, as you said, it's very famous, known and vocal that the Americans are interested to do that. So I believe that if you wanted like more inside information, you should have asked our ambassador in Washington where exactly things are. But the officials, like I represent the official statements of the Israeli government, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister said this is something that is very problematic.
So you're going to try and be equal to different sides of the room. There's a gentleman just in the front of the back section.
Okay, the gentleman standing up.
Yes. What's your name, sir?
Carol or Carol Cohen. Being against Romanian, Carol is a male name, but I can prove it.
I'm not sure it's legal, sir.
First of all, congratulations for your assignment to be ambassador, excellency ambassador to the Court of St. James's. And we wish you Atzlacha Rabba throughout your assignment. Half a question and a plea from the heart. You mentioned tangentially about the media, just tangentially the BBC. The BBC and The Guardian are some of the worst promoters of anti-Semitism worldwide. They have an enormous reach.
I can't agree with you. I can't. It's a team. I don't agree.
Sure. I follow the output of the BBC. I remember you being not interviewed, but being harangued. They were barking at you. They were not letting you finish a sentence. That's the way they deal with it. When they speak to any of the practitioners of the religion of peace, they are very deferent and extremely polite and so on. A plea, first of all, to Israel's representatives to check, to verify the most hostile people the BBC is sending there. They are well known. Jeremy Bowen, Yolan Neal, quite a few. And they are openly, they stop pretending that, I know that. Yes, I
know what you're saying. Do you want me to tell you what I think should be done?
Self-defense, they should not be allowed in Israel. They are hostile parties.
We will never do something that will, do something like that. I want to answer that because I feel, first of all, you're speaking from the bottom of your heart. And the second, you speak on behalf of many people that every time I go to, actually many media stages, but BBC is very big, so I guess it has a big impact. People are really upset. Now, all I can tell you, I think that British media is very famous for being critical, and I wasn't expecting the British media not to be critical. But there is something I want to address to you. I'm not a British citizen. I'm Israeli, as you know. But you're all British citizens sponsoring the BBC. What does it mean? That your voice can be sound if you write a letter or if you express your frustration because you are sponsoring the BBC. This is not a private tool. This is actually a public service that is signed on being impartial. Now, I went to the BBC Centre just this week and we had a discussion about how Israel is being covered. But as much as I can represent the case of Israel, you can represent the case of being a British citizen, being insulted from what you experience as attitude that is totally impartial. And you can express that. Today, the expression is totally unlimited, starting from, old-fashioned letters, going all the way through social media. And I think the crowd that sits in this room is big. And if you speak on behalf of many people, you can actually take an action. And actually, one of the things I've been hearing from so many people is about the media. And there are so many ways to deal with that when you are a citizen that is sponsoring this meeting.
I've seen a few shaking heads in the room, and I can sense the frustration in the audience. And I'm also very well aware that complaints, unfortunately, to the BBC invariably fall on deaf ears.
I don't want to say the embassy is not doing its work, because we have a spokesperson that every time something is incorrect, and every time that we feel like Israel is being treated in the wrong way, or the story is being covered from a very unfair perspective, this is our spokesman work to, pick up the phone and speak to the officials at the BBC. But you're speaking about something that is bigger. You're speaking about attitude, you're speaking about narrative, you're speaking about something that is bigger. And I definitely think you can express your frustration.
The more the merrier, as you said.
A journalistic question, and then a journalist to ask the question. So.
Good evening, thank you. Firstly, thank you to Natasha for a great and excellent Q&A this evening. My question to the ambassador is, it's actually two questions, and it's based on the media. I've seen you several times, in fact, going back a couple of years, as Deputy Foreign Minister, and there was a specific show that you were on Al Jazeera.
Yes.
I myself was the Israeli political analyst based in the Knesset for Al Jazeera in Jerusalem for a couple of years until they got rid of me. But you seem to reflect and deflect so many hostile questions. You've done this with a number of other networks. How do you do that? What goes through your mind? How do you manage to stay so positive? And how do you relax? There's four questions.
Can you send that to the spokesperson of the embassy? Because he's like, you need to stay calm. You can't be so emotional about this.
I'll text him right now.
First of all, thank you. Second of all, it's really my duty and my job. But third, I will share with you behind the scenes secrets. One of the things we do before we go, I have many years of television experience. I started my public service as television journalist, basically as a commentator on television. And one of the things, when you go, before you perform, you speak to the audience, you don't speak to the person who's interviewing you. And one of the things we do, and I need to thank that to the great team in the embassy, we sit together, no matter who's the interview with, no matter who's the person. I never just go there and say, I'm an Israeli. I can say, we have Q&As, we have our British workers at the embassy, bringing the British perspective to the event, and they throw the questions for me from the British perspective, and we are addressing it with different answers. And we have an audience, we're bringing some other people to listen, and we're asking, this argument, this goes through. And some people would say, no, this argument is not good enough. And some people will say, this argument is strong, but you need to have something more personal. Like I was telling every time I was during the military program, actually talking about my parents sitting in a shelter, and the fact that the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, was for the first time in our history being evacuated because rockets were thrown on Jerusalem and on the Israeli parliament. And all those examples, just to make it visible and people can feel what Israelis feel. So we practice, we do messaging, we definitely check where's the gap between the way we Israelis see things and the way the British audience are going to see it and listen to it. And we try to do our best to build a bridge through messaging. And when I come to the television, whatever it is, the interview, I have already my messages being made, like what's my most important message. And of course, there are questions and you want to address them. But do you know who's Lillian Wilder?
Yes.
So any other person knows who's Lillian Wilder? So Lillian Wilder, she was a very famous American, how would you say Lillian Wilder? Lillian Wilder was like speech, she trained speakers, but she was doing both in public speaking and media. And I'll share with you a moment that I had the former Prime Minister. One day we sit before we prepare for our campaign, and he's preparing us for showing up in the media. Netanyahu was very strong always in like international media. And it's like, you're doing such a bad job with this. This is not the question. Like, you know, this thing, the politician comes and then he says, excuse me, sir, this is not the question. The real issue is whatever. Do you do that in Britain or just in Israel? In Israel, everyone is just doing this horrible mistake. They're not addressing the question. They're just coming and throwing the message. So he said, let me share with you the secret of Lillian. Lillian used to train Netanyahu. And he said, the biggest mistake you can do when you go and perform on international media is not addressing the questions. The people in the house want you to address the questions unless they're going to feel you're sneaking out from this important issue. But never get them to control the agenda. So one of the things, again, it's very challenging, I'm not saying I'm always successful about that, is to remember, as much as you want to answer the questions, this is not the goal. The goal is to speak to, you know, let's just make fake names, to Adam McCartney sitting there in Manchester, and he doesn't care about Israel, but he understands something bad is happening in the Middle East. And you need to get them involved, and you need to understand that he's watching you, and he wants to be affiliated with you. So all I'm trying most of the time is, first of all, to try to explain how much we're fighting the same war, and how much we share the same values. Those are some of the things I can share with you about how we practice.
So I'll give you a question then. How do you handle the fact that the majority of the perception is that Israel is illegally occupying the area called the West Bank against international law? The British media says that all the time, the BBC, and the diplomacy reflects that. Israel and Jerusalem are regarded as two separate territories when it comes to COVID recognition of vaccinations.
Well,
how do you deal with that?
Of course, we fight that. We think that on a diplomatic level, we never accept, like every time there is a statement that makes Jerusalem as a different part of Israel, we've definitely delivered a message to the British officials that this is unacceptable. This is how diplomacy works. You usually say, those are the things we are accepting, those are the things we're not accepting. I think as the years go by, more people realize that the narrative, the old narrative, is irrelevant, because more people realize that, wait a second, this is not about settlements. 2005 happens, it's not about settlements. We campaigned in the last 7 years about the legal status of settlements. And one of the things, I think it was a very, very important mission that the Israeli government did a few years ago, was the Edmund Levy report. Edmund Levy was Israeli Supreme Court judge, speaking about legal issues, and he addressed the issue of the legality of Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria. And I think he did a masterpiece of reflecting the ongoing discourse about the legality of the settlements. So we can say the truth, the historic truth. We can also present the legal truth about the legality of the settlements of the communities in Judea and Samaria. But we also need to speak about the horizon for peace in our region that has nothing to do whether we're going to have another kindergarten, in whether it's in Bethel or in Jerusalem. This is not about kindergartens and houses. This is really about the ideology that denies our right to exist. And I think by not saying that, this is the mistake. The mistake is we keep on having this discussion. Okay, so I can give you the whole brief, I can give you the Edmund Levy report, you can read it. You're going to have the realization that the settlements are legal. But people are not looking for legal, not legal. Maybe in this country, they care very much about international law, but they also are looking for solutions, horizons, and hope. And I think we need to discuss all those things. Horizons, hopes, paradigms, breaking paradigms, alternative thinking. We need to discuss all of that.
And calling out the ideology that says Jews can't live in certain areas simply because they're Jews. We've got a question from the gentleman at the back there.
Hi, Benjamin Arnold by name. Yes, that's plenty coming. You touched briefly on how the young people today seem less energized to support Israel, that less anti-Zionist than they used to be. Do you think maybe part of that is because 30, 40, 50 years ago, Israel was seen as a developing country? Now, these kids, they're taken to Israel more frequently, it's easier to go, they see a modern, vibrant country, they see some technology leaders, medical leaders, all these sorts of things, and they actually see we don't need to support Israel quite the same way maybe their parents did. first degree, and if so,
Yes.
how do you sort of re-energise the young people today to support it the way it's been done in the past?
Yes, first of all, I do think that for many people, when Israel was small and developing, it was more easy to support. And now that we are actually a strong and very successful country, some people are saying, well, how am I going to be part of this successful enterprise? So first of all, I think that this is part of the reason, but it's not the whole story. I think lack of, I'm trying to find, lack of modern history is also part of it. I get sometimes very strange questions about things that show that people don't have the history right, if you know what I'm saying. I think sometimes people don't really know about what is jihadi ideology. I don't think they understand Islamic ideology that comes from this side of the world, like Hamas. And I think they're looking at this in a very simplistic formulas. So I think part of the thing is to bring the people in professional delegations to Israel and let them experience more. I think many people here experience Israel as a holiday place, but they don't go through, the whole really interesting parts of the country where they can make the debate something more deeper because they experience many other areas of the country. I think when you go just to have fun in Herzliya, you can't really have a deep discourse about Israel. What's your approach? What do you think the youngsters are missing?
I don't know. I think myself, something that, I do my Israeli charities, but I'm still thinking, there's lots of charity support here as well. And back when Israel was a developing country, it couldn't support itself. Nowadays, I'm not saying it's easy like that. My brother is there, I know it's not easy like that, but it's this modern, vibrant country. So why are we're not billionaires as well as a country? So I don't know.
So let's define differently the word support. I don't think that we're speaking about financial support, which was the old way of supporting Israel. Of course, there are many charities that are doing wonderful things, and I think we should thank them for that. But when I'm speaking about young generation support, I speak about identity issues, which is much bigger. Like, what does it mean to me as a Jew that there is the state of Israel? Does it mean something to me? Or it's Portugal, Greece, Israel, another holiday location? And in Israel, it happens to be that I also have relatives and friends, but it's actually the same. It's just this sunny place in the Middle East. And I think the identity thing, this is what we need to work on. It's not whether I wave the flag. You will wave the flag if it means something to your identity. So this is the big thing.
We've just got time for a couple more questions. I take the lady just at the front and then the lady waving at the back.
Thank you. My question to follows on similar question to what we just asked about students. So we spoke about the lack of engagement, and I think the biggest issue at the moment is campus life for students and the rise of anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist attacks on students.
Are you working on campus?
No, but I'm a teacher in high school, so I see before they
Which one?
Hadley and Gospel.
Oh, I met some of your girls because of the Chidon Tanakh.
Yes,
it was beautiful.
So what can you say to the students themselves to give them some boost of inspiration, because whatever you want to call it, because they are really struggling all around the country dealing with these.
So one of the things I'm going to do this year is actually to do my campus tour here, because last year I couldn't do it because there was no campus life, because everything was virtual. And this is something I really missed out last year. And first of all, I want to experience myself the challenges from the students. I want to hear from them, what do they need from us? But we have a diplomat in the embassy, that Jenny, that this is her job. She's doing campuses for years as part of civil society work. And I think that basically part of the issue is that many of the societies, like they deal with Jewish life. Like there are two issues, like, am I being Jewish? And am I being supportive of Israel? And at a certain point, like, it's not the same thing. Like being Jewish, being supportive of Israel, it's like become like, what am I more? Am I more like dealing with Jewish holidays, Jewish identity, who I will marry, those kind of questions which are really significant to Jewish identity. And then Israel issues are those that are being colored more political. And I think it's a mistake because Israel is part of your identity as a Jew. And maybe this is where we need to get in and to try to understand where people are missing out this part, that Israel is part of your identity as Jew, because this is the state of the Jewish people.
Lady just about.
Hi, thank you very much. So my question kind of touches on the previous two questions about some of the younger generation who might find it difficult to engage with Israel, but it's not because they see it as a holiday destination. It's not because it jars with their religious views. It's because they might be bombarded with so many different social media pressures, things that they read and they take as read, a bit like those really rude individuals who stood up and tried to disrupt the meeting. How would you speak to youth like that feel, you mentioned, that it's swimming against the tide to support what they might see as an imperialistic state? How would you speak to them?
First of all, it's a very good point. What's your name?
Victoria.
Victoria, it's a very good point. I think social media and the atmosphere where the youngsters are living in, it's a big part and it's a big ingredient of the process. And I think you're absolutely right. There is like this formula of Israel as a modern colonialist country, which of course, whoever is claiming that probably never knew what is colonialism. One of my favorite questions about people speaking about Israel as an imperial country, I'm always saying like, what were the resources of Israel? Just let me know, because usually colonialism was about taking over resources. So just let us know, because last time I checked, we never had oil. We just experienced finding gas just in the last few years. So it's quite ridiculous. And also, if a Jewish child, a Jewish girl, a Jewish boy, can't say simply that we have 3,000 years of connection to the land of Israel. So we're not Europeans, I mean, even the narrative of Europeans. I mean, sometimes it's so ridiculous that over 50% of Israel's population, the majority of Israel's population, not including even the Arab Israelis, just the Jews, coming from Arab countries. So even that, even the idea of European colonialism is not fact-based. So just being able to answer those two things, like even the idea that Israelis are white, this is so ridiculous, because if you come to Israel, you see that the majority color is definitely not white. The white is a minority. So everything is about misunderstanding the facts. So I would like to believe that people should be able to say even those three facts just in order to kill the argument of imperialism. So I'm just saying that it's really about understanding, wait a second, what are you claiming? So maybe you have difficulties with colonialism. That's absolutely okay to have a discussion, but don't, have this psychological, address to Israel, because it has nothing to do to the Israeli story.
Final question. It's the first time that shot up was the lady just over there.
The question I'd like to ask you is, for those of us who've been involved with trying to put Israel's case for many years, as I have, why has Israel never realized that the best investment is to have a unit there which deals with Hasbara, which goes all over the world, get the best brains from the Hebrew University, look at it, because it comes over as very amateurish. And I think the problem is, as my lovely Israeli daughter-in-law said not long ago, I think she's changed her mind, we don't care what the world thinks. And that's the essence of the problem, that you really never understood how the thing. And all you have to do is just look at the comment section of the Times, the Telegraph. This is not, the Guardian.
Yes.
And not only that, the moderators. And it's not about values. It's about our right to have this place at all. And unless it's addressed in simple terms, in the legal, our rights going back to 1920, I'm afraid it will never cut it out. So my question is, please, maybe you can send a message.
Thank you. I think many people would identify what you say, because again, you're coming from such a wonderful vision of saying you need to bring the narrative, and you're not working enough hard to bring the narrative. Do I understand what you're saying?
Well, there isn't a cohesive message, a professional, it's just piecemeal. And sometimes when you see some of the Israeli representatives on television and how they speak, it's defensive and it's apologetic, and we just cringe.
But I would like to offer something. I would love to have a chat with you about it because again, this is like as old as the Israeli state, probably the bad Hasbara. Like diplomats keep on having this, but I think like you're coming from a place where actually you can give us some advice. So I would love to speak to you. So I'll take from the organizers your phone number because I do want to hear. You probably have something in mind, not just to say do more Hasbara. You probably have something more serious in mind. So I would love to hear that on a telephone. Is that okay?
To be continued then.
Yes, to be continued, yes.
Ambassador, it's been an enormous privilege, not just to have you here this evening, but also to have had you here the last year. And
2 more years to go, and then you can have other people and enjoy it.
There is going to be some refreshment just served at the back, so hopefully we can continue the discussion on some of those questions.
I really would like to thank you for engaging. I really would like to thank you for being so wonderful and asking questions. And for me, it's a great pleasure to meet real people. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Natasha, for being such a great coordinator.
Well, as ever at these events, many, many thank yous. Very briefly, I just wanted to say thank you to the Zionist Federation, Borehamwood and Elstree Synagogue, of course the World Zionist Organisation, the ZCC and Rabbi Chapter, and for everyone venturing out and not viewing this particular event over your screen. I hope you do enjoy the opportunity to meet people in real life at the back of the hall. And until next time.
And please come to Israel now that everything opens up.
Excuse me, before you run off, I wanted just to say, I'm Robert Fessenstein, the Vice Chair of the Zionist Federation. On behalf of the Zionist Federation, thank you. President of the Zionist Central Council from Manchester, thank you as well. Your Excellency, of all the things that you have said this evening, the thing that I believe that we should take away most seriously is what's passed your husband from the Queen, which is about relationships. And the fact that we haven't been able to go out and shake hands, press the flesh as it were, and meet with people over the last 18 months has been very detrimental to the sort of work that we as Zionists want to do on behalf of the State of Israel. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I hope it's
more to come, more to come. We want to do more things together, yeah.
Wait, there is... Go on, Daria.
Oh, thank you so much. Daria, thank you. You know how be able to meet her daughter because she's finally coming to the UK with the Prime Minister on COP26. So it's great. Thank you. Yeah. What is that? It's look at Georgia, the frontal with these beautiful flowers and the flowers. Can I get one? Sure. Yeah. Have something fun. You too. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much.